All right,
Okay.
off we go.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Two Priests in Palestine, a podcast of interviews and story sharing that sheds light on the current reality of Palestine. My name is Jerlyn Henry, and with me is my co-host, Jeff Nowers. We are both priests in the Anglican Diocese of Toronto in Canada.
In December 2025, Jerlin and I were part of a nine-person delegation that made a solidarity pilgrimage to the West Bank. And we went there to meet with Palestinians, to listen, to learn, to bear witness, so that after returning home, we might be more effective ambassadors of Palestinian liberation.
And while we were in Palestine, we met with Samuel Munayer, a Palestinian liberation theologian. Sam holds a graduate degree from the University of Exeter, where he studied under Ilan Pape. He also collaborated extensively with his brother John.
John is completing a PhD at the University of Edinburgh, and he works in the field of interreligious peace building and justice in Jerusalem. Together, John and Sam are the co-editors of an important volume titled The Cross and the Olive Tree. That's what it looks like right there. And we are delighted that both of them are joining us of Two Priests and Palestine. We're looking forward to learning from them about Palestinian liberation theology.
Thanks for being here, guys.
So welcome, John and Sam. And I want to begin maybe with some personal context, if I might. You are both based in Jerusalem, and Jerlin and I were there, as you know, 6 months ago in December. And things have changed since then for the worse, with the United States and Israel triggering this war on Iran. And I'm just wondering what has life been like for you over the last few months?
It's last time I saw you both when you were in Palestine 6 months ago, it felt like a lifetime ago with the amount of events that have happened in Palestine. It's been very, very difficult in nearly all aspects. And during the first period of the year, from February to April, we were experiencing constant sirens and um, the implications of the war and all that entails economically and more. But we also saw that the Israeli state, together with settlers, took advantage of the war to increase settler violence, to increase displacement, and the landscape in the West Bank and in Jerusalem is changing in such a rapid pace that it's sometimes difficult for me to recognize my own country and my own home.
Wow.
That's what's happening in Jerusalem in the West Bank. And at the same time in Gaza, many of our friends and colleagues are suffering very, very, in very harsh conditions, from the outbreak of diseases to the infestation of rats now.
I've heard
Uh,
about that. Yeah. Yeah, the rat infestation is just out of control.
it's out of control, and it's due to not providing sufficient humanitarian aid and reconstruction in Gaza for the population that is living in rubble with no proper sewage infrastructure and food and water and so on. So
Yeah.
life is very difficult, and we are only seeing a more rapid escalation of the situation being deteriorated. And now with the upcoming elections that are to take place soon, or maybe sooner than we think, the threat of a new war or a new um, plan to take over the West Bank and Gaza and ethnically cleanse Palestinians from their lands is seem to be on the horizon in a much pace. So the situation is very tough. It's very tiring, and it's very, very bleak. And people are in their last strengths trying to fight.
Wow. Wow.
The only thing I would add, because I completely agree with everything Sam said, is that sort of the fascist right-wing Israeli movement is sort of celebrating its dominance and the different budgets that it's receiving to expand settlements or to Judaize different areas in the land. When I mean Judaize, I mean get rid of the Palestinian population and make it Israeli Jewish. And another point that is very important for the Palestinian community inside of Israel, which make up around 20% of the population, and me and Sam too are part of that population. The Israeli state has allowed for crime to foster and flourish within those communities in order to break down the fabric of society of Palestinian communities inside of Israel. So we're seeing nearly every other day a Palestinian being killed within these sort of the policy of allowing for crime to flourish in order to also try and get Palestinians inside of Israel to leave the land.
You know, when we were there, I don't know if you remember this, Jerlin, but Richard Sewell, the last night that we were there, we met with him, and he said, you know, if things don't, and this is 6 months ago, he said this. He said if things don't begin to stabilize in some way, you know, we're gonna see a situation descend into a hell that we've never been to before. That was 6 months ago. He said that, and just listening to both of you now, he seems prophetic.
Yeah, I mean, we even seen it. We see it in our nephews. Me and Sam are not fathers, or at least not yet. Inshallah,
Yeah,
in the future.
yeah.
But we've seen how also the situation is affecting children here, and we've seen how our nephews have been affected in a very negative way from the sirens and the just level of hostility. One of our nephews was in a park and he got spat on by an Israeli Jewish kid who was older than him because he was speaking Arabic to his brother. So this is the
Wow.
type of environment that we're living in.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, around 4 weeks ago, I went to visit a house in Silwan where we meet with some of the communities there. And that house is now, the people in the house have been displaced. They no longer live there, and it's been taken over by a settler. How do you process such an event and continue
Yeah.
life? You know, there's certain roads you take in the West Bank where you remember when there were Bedouin communities living there, and now it's empty tents and structures, completely abandoned as if it's a ghost town. And this is in a matter of weeks and months. And the sad thing is that we're expecting that to increase. So now we're thinking who's next? Which
Mm.
house is next to be demolished or displaced? Which community is next to be completely attacked and surrounded by settlers and abandoned? This is the type of conversation and uh, mentality that people and discussion people are having, uh, especially in the West Bank and Jerusalem.
Yeah, what an urgent situation. It makes me wonder how both of you are able to even find time to just think as theologians with this with life as it is. But anyway, let me ask you just about your theological background. And thank you for the update that you've given. That's very grim what you've just shared. But I want to ask you just about your theological background. Both of you are Christians. You are both academically trained theologians. You both studied in the UK. Um, how did both of you become interested in theology? Did it come naturally to both of you?
I think growing up in Jerusalem as a Christian community, when you're really in many ways forced, not in a negative way, to engage with people of different faiths, religion is a topic of discussion. Religion is a place where you want to explore and learn about, because most likely the person who's your neighbor or next to you that you meet in the street or the supermarket is of a different faith and religion. So I think that sort of is a first place of curiosity. And the second one is that we would also encounter so many Christian Zionists who were coming to Jerusalem, who were really advocating for the displacement of our own people or justifying the displacement of our grandparents in 1948. And that just didn't make sense to us as Christians. How can it be that people who, like me, call themselves Christians, use the Bible to justify the suffering of my people and my family? And that sort of encouraged us to engage in theology and theological questions. and pursue it academically as well.
Hmm.
And then finally, I'd say that our family was a big influence. So our father is a academically trained theologian too, who's been pretty active within the sort of Palestinian Christian movement against the occupation and critiquing Christian Zionism. And our mother, who's not academically trained as a theologian, is also a theologian, right? You don't have to be academically trained to speak about God and think about God in serious ways. And our mother worked always amongst communities that were extremely marginalized in Palestine. So we really learned from her too. What does theology look like practically? So I think the influence of both of our parents also encouraged that.
Sam, was the path the same for you?
You know, it's I'll add an extra element. It's that we're also doing this as brothers. So the conversations we had over the dinner table was not only with my parents and through the example of my parents, but also with my brothers. But what really interested me in the academic nature of theology and why to study that was its powerful voice that I witnessed in Palestine and its ability to really create change and to think
Mm.
about different issues that are not so easy to understand or not so easy to explain and simplify. And I think that academic aspect of theology, of speaking about God, creating speech for God, about God, is something that drew me in more than any other topic. And in my perspective, that was more of a priority than to study a skill or another set of knowledge in order to advance my profession or to advance some professional ambition that I have, but actually to take the scene of the academia, the scene of the university, to ask questions and to try and figure out certain topics and certain experiences I've had as a Palestinian Christian.
Mm.
Interesting. So maybe let's turn our attention to like liberation theology. It emerged in the 1960s in Latin America and then into Black communities in the US, the liberation theology in India, Minjun in South Korea. When did Palestinian liberation theology emerge, and what circumstances kind of prompted this?
So I'm going to answer your question, but I'm also going to add some nuance to it,
Yeah.
Jerilyn. First, the classical way of pinpointing when Palestinian liberation theology emerged was with the publication of Naim Atik's book, Justice and Only Justice, that was published in 1989. But before the publication of that book, we see that Reverend Naim Atik was studying in San Francisco, was formulating a theology of liberation, um, and with the help of different other actors such as Mark Ellis, who also wrote a Jewish theology of
Mhm.
liberation, uh, created the seminal work where we can say this is the first time a theology is named as a Palestinian theology of liberation. In 1989, the context of that is the First Intifada. So it's a
Mm.
grassroots movement that was all over Palestine. It started in Gaza and then later went to the West Bank. Was this grassroots movement that was fighting against the occupation. Intifada literally means the shaking off. So that publication and the movement of the churches and the Palestinian Christians, the vibrancy that they had in the First Intifada, ultimately emerged in academic form, and that's when we say that Palestinian liberation theology emerged in 1989. So a bit later than what Black liberation theology and Latin American liberation theology is known to being emerged. But this is where I want to put some nuance
Yeah.
because we say that Black liberation theology was emerged in the 1960s, in the late 1960s with James Cone,
Hmm.
Black Power and Black Theology, and he wrote this in the wake of the Detroit riots.
Mm.
Um, However, you had people and influences such as Bishop Henry McNeil Turner in the late 19th century that famously wrote a sermon saying, I worship a black God, not a white God, and really was articulating a form of black liberation theology 70 years before James Cone was even born. The same goes to Latin American liberation theology. We look at Gustavo Gutierrez as the first, theologian to articulate a theology of liberation in Latin America in the early 70s. But we know that in the 1950s, there was a grassroots movement of theology of liberation amongst the people. And I would argue the same is for Palestine. Justice and Only Justice is that book, is that seminal work that we point to and say that Naim Atik is naming something. He's the first one to name something. But the theology itself amongst the people was before that.
Mm.
And I'm currently also reading a book. It's titled The Syrian Christ.
Hmm.
And the author writes this during the Ottoman period when Palestine was considered under Greater Syria. Yeah, and the name the Syrian Christ really means the Palestinian and the Lebanese and the Jordanian and the Syrian Christ. And there he's articulating very much a lot of what Naim Atik is articulating. So there's one thing to say about which book emerged, which is important, because the language and the name of liberation theology has a certain space and time, but it's also important to remember the nuance and how we understand liberation theology and where it is also with the people that sometimes and most times predates the publication.
And I'll just add
Yeah.
another maybe food for thought here for thinking about Palestinian theology is that most Christians, and including most clergy people in Palestine, belong to the Eastern tradition. They are either Greek Orthodox or Greek Catholic.
Right.
And therefore, the way theology is done in those contexts, spaces, in those churches is different than the Roman Catholic and the Protestant churches in Palestine. So just to reinforce what Sam is saying about the theology existing already, this theology of liberation, we already see different expressions of it within the Greek Orthodox and the Greek Catholic churches, with very important figures really pushing this idea. They might not have named it as Palestinian liberation theology, but in every sense of the word, they lived that type of liberation theology.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much.
No, that's very helpful. Let me ask you a follow-up question. Just Sam, you raised the name Naim Atik, very important figure in the development of Palestinian liberation theology. Published a number of important books. And as I understand it, and as I've been told, if you wanted to kind of distill what a lot of what Naim Atik is presenting in terms of the core elements of Palestinian liberation theology, it would really come down, as I understand it, to an emphasis on Jesus as a Palestinian Jew, kind of an emphasis on inclusivity, on justice, and on nonviolence. Those would kind of be four pillars, I suppose. Is there, do you see debate among Palestinian Christians about that? Is that just sort of assumed these four pillars, or is there kind of a bit of debate and contestation?
It's an excellent question. I would say for the majority of Palestinian theologians, they would agree on those tenets, right? This idea that God's love for humanity is one of inclusivity, and that the mission for us here on earth is to promote justice and reconciliation, amongst other things. That Jesus was a Palestinian Jew, and so on, and also the question of nonviolence. I think is more or less unanimous amongst most of the Palestinian theologians or the Palestinian Christian leaders. I think one of the reasons we might not see as much disagreement is because a lot of our work is focused on combating Christian Zionism.
Yeah.
And sort of pushing back against the West and Western Christianity. And therefore we see at times less internal dialogue about internal issues or internal differences. Because we also know on the ground that not all Palestinian Christians agree with some of these positions. There's also famous cases of Palestinian Christian leaders using violence and supporting certain forms of violence. And I think in light of recent events, also some people are starting to question sort of the nonviolence strategy or principle. So I think there is a unanimous, more or less, amongst Palestinian Christian theologians, but I think it's also because of the context that we're not only trying to mostly combat Western Christianity and its support for Zionism, we're also a small number of theologians. So statistically, there's less theologians. and therefore we see less disagreement on these issues.
That's really helpful. You guys have written, and like we heard when I think we met with Sam in Jerusalem, about how first generation Palestinian liberation theology can sometimes feel like it's intended for the Western academic and like political audience. In contrast, you both point to a lived theology of grandmothers and daily liturgy. Can you tell us a little bit about like a specific practice or a phrase or a faith lesson from your own family growing up in Jerusalem that feels more primary to your survival than anything you read in like a UK seminary?
100% the first generation of, and I think it's proper to say the first generation because they paved a lot of the way for us in terms of how we think, what questions we ask, the resources we have at hand, um, and a lot of the thinking and the theology that Naim Atik and many others did allowed us to also explore different conversations. Um, and combat the West less maybe because we can focus on different conversations. One, I'm gonna answer in three ways. The first way that I look at theology in a way that is primary and is important and is much more connected to the community and the land is food. The ways
Mm.
I connect to spirituality, to the land itself, us as a family, and understanding God and speaking about God is either through food, which is an expression of love and hospitality, and also the connection to land. So we eat seasonally here in Palestine, and we learn from the land itself. And I think that theologically is something that you cannot depict in any textbook in the West. You think about the beautiful hummus and sakhan and other Palestinian dishes. You learn sometimes much more from eating those dishes around your family than any textbook that Karl Barth or Karl Rahner might have written. So food is the first. The second is saints. Uh, as
Mm.
uh, as John mentioned, most of the Palestinian Christians are affiliated to the Eastern tradition, to the Eastern Church, where saints are very important in worship. And something in our family that we draw a lot of inspiration from is Saint George, who is the
Mm.
patron saint of Palestine, but it's also where Saint George is actually buried in the church where my and John ancestors helped build. Our grandfather used to say that we are descendants of Saint George.
Wow.
So connecting to stories of saints and the indigenous practices that we have around saints have really helped us in formulating our spirituality in connection to one another and connection to the land. In terms of a phrase and being a Jerusalemite, it's the phrase المسيح قام حقا قام ونحن شهود على ذلك, which means Christ is risen, he is risen indeed, and we are witnesses to it. I think that chant that we say on Holy Fire, in the Holy Fire ceremony on Saturday, which is an indigenous practice in Palestinian Christianity in Palestine and specifically in Jerusalem, where the fire bursts out of the tomb in the Church of Resurrection, encapsulates my faith. I believe in the risen Christ. I believe in it indeed, and my role is to be a witness to it. And that
Wow.
saying that, not only just saying that as a phrase, but chanting that. And it's a call and response chant, so it's done always in community. I think for me, that theology is something that is important to recognize beyond the different textbooks and academic work that is done. That is the theology around the dinner table, around the local saints where you have indigenous practices, and that chant of Holy Fire Saturday is something that theologically I think John and I value much more than any textbook we have read or will write.
Mm. That's powerful. Is it Christ is risen indeed, and we are witnesses to it?
Exactly.
Beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. John, did you want to add anything?
No,
I would
that's
just
perfect.
kind of speak to what Sam is saying. Saints are a huge influence on people's lived religion here, and the
Hmm.
saints are also connected to seasons, which are connected to specific crops or plants. So it's very common for specific feast days to either celebrate a specific plant or for that plant or fruit to be around the church or the dinner table. But I would really stress that the Holy Fire ceremony is probably the most important ceremony for Palestinian Christians, and is one that any person can understand. You don't have to be academically trained. You just witness how a church that has no candles lit and no light, and suddenly light comes out of the tomb in the Church of Resurrection, and it passes from one person to the other. It's just remarkable how it passes, and it moves from checkpoint, passes through checkpoint to another checkpoint, and it sort of breaks down the barriers that the military occupation presents. And it empowers the people to continue their daily lives, which are, as we said in the beginning of this conversation, really has been for the past 3 years a nightmare.
Hmm.
And even before that, extremely hard. So when you see people celebrating and feeling empowered and shouting that they are witnesses to the resurrection, you can't stay sort of neutral or not feel anything inside of you. It's contagious. And I can say from my personal experience that the Holy Fire ceremony, every time I see the fire come out, it really moves me emotionally.
Don, are you talking about the fire going to the checkpoints like figuratively or literally? It's like the one fire kind of this. Can you share a little bit more?
Yes, so the fire literally goes from one person to the other. It first starts in the Church of Resurrection in Jerusalem and then spreads throughout Jerusalem. And then there are special cars that will take this fire through checkpoints. So the other communities, the other Christian communities around Palestine can receive the fire. And even there's some cars that will then take it to the airport, and then from there it will be flown to many
What?
Orthodox churches around the world. But when you think about the fire spreading from Jerusalem to every single corner in Palestine, and it doesn't take into account the checkpoints and the barriers, and it really speaks to the power of the resurrection, that the power of the resurrection can break through these checkpoints, it can break through the wall, it can break through the
Wow.
occupation. And when you speak to Palestinians, they will say, "We are the fire.
Mm.
We are the fire. We have the power now to be witnesses in every single place that we go through, and nothing can stop us."
Very much
Wow.
also a Pentecost moment, with the tongues of fire resting upon, everyone in that room. You kind of get a sense that this is the image, but on a much grander scale.
You can say it's the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
It's a symbol of the Holy Spirit. It is the fire is pointing us to the resurrected Christ and comforting us and empowering us to continue. And I think that is a theology that is powerful and that
Mm.
mobilizes and that it's political. It's political and it's something that children can participate, elders can participate in. It's not confined in uh, the air conditioning conference room or classroom. It is on the streets, it's in the churches. And once once you participate, because I participated last year in the Holy Fire ceremony, you congregate in the church for a long time. You're sweating, there's a lot of people, it's crowded. Uh, and the focus is on getting to the church. But once the fire is out, you're out of the church. The church is no
Mm.
longer the focus. It's getting out there and spreading the fire. I think that's important for us to reflect that we shouldn't focus only on the church once the fire is out. Our mission is to spread out of the church and share the fire together as the church bells are ringing. I think that I think day is one that we can reflect on and learn from that practice.
Yeah, that
Thank
is so amazing. Hearing you share about this. Yeah, that's wonderful, wonderful. If I can move us along a little bit here, I want.
These are the candles. This
Okay.
is the candles that you take to the church, and usually it's 33 to represent the age of Christ, and
Mm.
it's made out of
Oh.
beeswax. And the beeswax represents the virginity of Mary because it's a virgin animal. And the wick represents Christ, which is the relationship between Christ and Mary. These are actually the candles I was lighting during the ceremony. And here is the icon. Maybe this is not for the recording, but this is for us. Uh, Here's the icon of Jesus breaking the tomb and carrying Adam and Eve.
Okay.
I don't know
Okay.
if you can see it.
Beautiful. Well, we will
Yeah.
post this on YouTube as well, so the video is very helpful.
Oh yeah, yeah. This will be on
Excellent.
YouTube, so people
Yeah.
can definitely see that. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you. I want to ask you about an article that both of you wrote a few years ago, not that long ago, titled "Decolonizing Palestinian Liberation Theology." And I suppose both of you are would consider yourselves part of a like a second generation of Palestinian liberation theology. And so you wrote this article, in a sense, in a very kind way, pointing out some perhaps some shortcomings in the first generation. What was the share with us the substance of that article, and I'd like to know how was it received?
Yeah, so the article, the main aim for John and I's goal in writing that article was to create new conversation in Palestinian theology internally. A lot of our theology and advocacy and work is done to the West, and a lot of it follows what Naim Atik did in 1989, in
Mhm.
Justice and Only Justice. It's providing a counter hermeneutic to Christian Zionism and other form of colonial theologies. However, there are certain limitations in focusing Palestinian theology in just that manner. And those limitations is that there's a gap between the theology that is academically written to the people and that it becomes quite Western. If you're focusing on Western audiences, you can also incorporate some Western sources and Western language to that theology. That's not to discredit any of what the work has been done by other Palestinian theologians, but it's to point out that there's other conversations that we need and that we need to be aware of the coloniality that is present in all of our lives and all of our theories. The hegemony of colonialism and the way we think and the way we produce knowledge is not something that we can escape. It's something that we need to resist. It's something we need to illuminate, and it's something we can strive in moving in opposition against. And we wanted to point out that there is certain coloniality that we need to be aware of in Palestinian liberation theology. What sources are we using? Who is the target audience? And the content of the theology itself. So we wanted to criticize in a way to build our theology that can move into a more indigenous form.
Mm,
And those indigenous forms that we look as alternatives to do Palestinian theology in a way to inspire new conversations within our movement is within Orthodox traditions, which is very much connected to indigenous Christianity in Palestine. So we talk about the Holy Fire Ceremony in the article and saints, specifically Saint George. We draw on our own tradition, our own indigenous roots in the city of El-Lid, where Saint George is from and buried. And also the concept of sumud and intifada as popular concepts within Palestinian consciousness for us to do theology from. So looking at, for example, the powerful image of Christ being baptized and rejecting the powers of empire as a form of intifada, and understanding that intifada and what Christ was doing is in dialogue, and you can interpret one another accordingly. In terms of sumud, the understanding of being steadfast, that is the theologizing the Palestinian concept of sumud with Jesus being resilient on the cross and being resilient throughout his life, and how we can connect the path of the cross, the way of the cross, with the resilience of Palestinian people. And in fact, our own experiences as Palestinian people is a place of doing theology. We don't have to be trained in Germany or trained in the States or in the UK in order to look at our sources for doing theology. So it was really trying to offer an alternative, a new conversation, new methods, new sources, new voices for how Palestinian theology is being done. And in a way, it is honoring the first generation of Palestinian theologians by trying to extend the conversation that they started. And with it, there's a critique.
Hmm.
How it was being received, I think some people misunderstood what we were trying to do because we're not trying to say that the theology itself is colonial, but to say that the theology itself has coloniality, that there's some aspects of coloniality that is present in the theology, and it's something we need to be aware of. And I think there was a misunderstanding there. Other people took it personally,
Mm.
saying that you are attacking a tradition. Who are you to attack the tradition? You're not even PhD. I wrote this without yet getting my BA. John, I think, was in the process of obtaining his master's. We were young. Who are we to write and criticize?
Yeah.
And it's in English. Why are you writing it in English?
Mm.
We recognize that we are also limited in this article. But I think one example of how it was received, which was very honoring, was actually with Naim Atik, where he was in Palestine and we had a meeting together, and he didn't agree with some of the substance of the article, but he said it brought us on the ta to the table together because previously we didn't have a relationship, and this article brought us together, brought us in conversation. And the same goes with one of the founders of Sabil Cedar Derbes, who also we cultivated a relationship with her and engaged with her through this article. And I think also younger Palestinian theologians use the critique to build off in their own theology and actually see the article as a path for them to also imagine theology differently, especially those who are doing Palestinian womenist theology. I think there was a very positive engagement there. So it's a mix of variety, uh, but I think overall the goal of the article, which was not perfect, the article itself is not perfect, was to create conversation.
I'll just add that this is coming from a context of me and Sam being students and happening to come across books within Black liberation theology and Latin American liberation theology and reading the internal conversations they were having and then reflecting why don't we have those same conversations. And I think we try to do it in the spirit of, a theological movement always needs to be in conversation with one another, but also self-critical. Because as Sam mentioned, me and Sam also are affected by coloniality, right? No one's is never perfect from it. So it was us trying to build and to try and create internal conversation that would hopefully yield fruits in the future.
I can kind of see how you were perhaps inspired by the experience of James Cone, his early work that was subjected to criticism by his own brother Cecil Cone and Gayrod Wilmore, and they kind of took James Cone to task and said, you got to examine your sources. And and that was very impactful on James Cone. And even in 1975 with that first Theology in the Americas conference in Detroit, where you had the convergence of Latin American liberation theologians meeting with black theologians and feminist theologians, and they were all kind of going at each other in a very conciliatory way, I suppose, but nonetheless challenging each other to go deeper and to take note of their shortcomings.
There's the famous encounter, I can't remember who it was with James Cone, but he encountered a Latin American liberation theologian, and James Cone saw a white person. And the Latin American liberation theologian saw James Cone and saw a capitalist. Um, so, these conversations, and especially the newer editions of A Black Theology of Liberation that Cone published, and in his preface, including all the criticism, the womanist criticism, Cecil Cohn, Gaylord Wilmore. The way we understood the criticisms and the way Cohn embraced the criticisms created a tradition of Black theology of liberation that still to this day continues and flourishes.
Yeah.
And when we do theology, we're doing theology in Palestine as a matter of life and death. And it's a matter of how we can envision liberation and community together. So not having these conversations, not having these critiques, not drawing the lessons that we have from other contexts and other thinkers, I think is a crime. And I think it detriments our pursuit for liberation and our pursuit for loving one another.
Mm.
So now, especially in a time of genocide, I think the internal conversation, the internal critique with love, of course, always with love, I think is really crucial in to ensure that we are also sometimes the oppressor. John and I, we are Palestinian, we are oppressed, but in certain contexts, we are the oppressor. I think it's important to have that as we are fighting for liberation for all people and for all places.
Thank you. Thank you, friends. Let's talk about your current work. Last year, you co-edited a book called The Cross and the Olive Tree. How did this book
There
come
it
about?
is.
Oh, there it is.
I was ready to pull it up here. There it is, right there.
How has it been received by Palestinians and by others kind of globally?
Yeah, the book project, and we write this in the introduction. We wrote it, but we wish we didn't have to write it because me and Sam had a completely different project in mind that we wanted to work with, and then the genocide started, and we felt like we had to address theologically what was happening in Gaza. And we also thought that it would be responsible to do it alone. And this is when we reached out to other Palestinian theologians, and also specifically those coming from our generation of theologians who tend to have less of a platform as well. So also we wanted, also different and new perspectives on what was happening. And it was a very difficult book to write. And so far we've received positive feedback both locally and internationally. Many of our local elders and colleagues have really encouraged us with the book on an individual basis, at least. There's been a lot of sort of encouragement on that front. And then internationally, I think many people who are in solidarity with Palestine really appreciated the book because the book is written to those in solidarity with Palestine and for Palestinians themselves. So it's more of an internal conversation of how can we grow as a movement? What type of questions is the movement asking itself? And not a critique of Christian Zionism, which is important, and other people do that brilliantly. But we thought that we needed to really focus on questions that constantly are in our minds, and people who are in solidarity and want to see justice and reconciliation in this land.
You know, yeah, that's very, very helpful. How do you see the current generation of Palestinian liberation theology, and you're representative of this? How do you see it dealing with questions of interfaith engagement? So specifically, I'm really interested in how you see Palestinian liberation theology today uh, contribute to a strengthening of Muslim Christian relations in particular.
We unfortunately one of the contributors we wanted in the book, but they didn't manage to be in it for this time, inshallah, in the next few projects, was a Palestinian Muslim liberation theologian.
Mm.
So we wanted an essay that included that angle. Just wanted to mention that because that was something that we were very much hoping for. I see Palestinian liberation theology in this move in the current moment, especially amongst younger people, to shift from or not to only focus on talking to the West and the Protestant West, but to other contexts around the world, to then go back to Islam and to focus on the importance of creating a grammar and creating a conversation with fellow Muslim brothers and sisters. And it's a question uh, in certain Islamic spaces whether they should call it a liberation theology, because liberation theology comes from a specific time and place, which is Christian. Nevertheless, what sort of engagement we have? Can share that one experience that younger people are having is specifically with the Dalit
Mm,
theological scene, because South India and India itself, there's so much diversity and there's so much engagement in interfaith that there's a lot of lessons that we can learn. And we're already seeing a lot of connections being made between Dalit theologians and Palestinian theologians.
Mm.
But I also think that this is a weakness, or this is a conversation yet to be had in Palestinian theology. Is there's one thing to say we are for the liberation of Palestine. Great. And I think that's a great entry point for a lot of interfaith work, good interfaith work, you know. Um, but there's another thing to create a certain spirituality, a certain conversation that we can engage with our Muslim brothers and sisters in a way that we can think and imagine together about liberation and be good neighbors to one another. I think that is something that is yet to be fully explored in Palestinian theology. I think it was in the past, in the 1980s, with the organization El-Liqa, which they really formed a healthy conversation between Muslims and Christians. And you see this also with Father Rafiq Khouri, who wrote mostly in Arabic, not in English. And he had some books and publications out with different imams. Um, but I think this is something that we need to really cultivate and explore. What is something that in the book, The Cross and the Olive Tree, that John and I write about, that I think is a good entry point for a discussion, an interfaith discussion, is a conversation about martyrdom. Because martyrdom is something that is very much relevant or bearing witness in Islam. Not only the context of martyrdom and death and witness, but also the spiritual tenets that we have to be witnesses. Muslims do the shahada to say, I bear witness that God is only one and Muhammad is his prophet, is the only is the prophet of God. So I think there are certain things that we are tapping into that are allowing that conversation to happen. The second one is art. Many Palestinian artists, Muslim, from Muslim backgrounds, identify the struggle of Palestine with the crucified Christ. You have poetry, you have songs, you have paintings that is all connected to the crucifixion and sometimes the resurrection of Jesus. And I think the theology in the art scene is a place where you can engage with Muslims and generally interfaith in a way that I think is fruitful. And I think the theological scene, with this book and with other younger talented theologians, are trying to not only engage with the Protestant West or the evangelical West, but also engaging back home with our Palestinian Muslim brothers and sisters, and generally in the global majority.
And people have to remember that Palestinian Christians from the river to the sea are around 180,000 people. We're a tiny population who's at least engaging in Christian theology. And another chapter in the book, alongside what Sam was mentioning as a point of departure for engaging with Muslims, and there's plenty of others that we need to engage in serious conversation, is another chapter written by Sam and my brother, Daniel. He wrote a chapter on how to engage with Israeli Jews.
mm.
How do you engage with Israeli Jews in the context that we live in? So I think also the book is trying to make those moves, or at least the beginning of those moves, so that we can continue the conversation and others can pick them up and run with them, because it's such a huge need, especially when we're such a tiny population. We're less than 2%.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about how you're perceived, right? Palestinian Christians are often like romanticized by visitors coming to Palestine as living stones of the early church. But you've written honestly about the profound sense of guilt and the deep rage that comes with watching your community face erasure while the global church largely looks away. When the cameras are off, what does it cost you emotionally and spiritually to carry the mantle of representing this community to us here in the West?
This is something we touch upon in the book,
Hmm.
because even with people who are supportive of the cause and are part of the movement, there's sometimes an unhealthy depiction of us being, as you mentioned, the living stones, or borrowing, I heard this from Omar actually, treating Palestinian Christians as pandas. You know, we're in a zoo, we're gonna get extinct, and not treating us as humans.
Mm,
And there's sometimes, or I feel sometimes in my relationship with some people, is that they seek to use you for their own career advancement, for their own legitimacy, for their own status. And that creates a relationship of a product and a consumer rather than a relationship of people coming together and recognizing that we are human, which means that we Palestinians also bear guilt. We also are participants in violence. We are also have we done enough to stop the genocide in Gaza? And I think it's important that we try to move away from this consumer and product relationship to what John and I call cultivating or harvesting olives together. You know, we all have a different role in harvesting olives together. So I think that's something that is felt when engaging in different groups and networks and scenes. Is that idea that we are Palestinian, so we are perfect. A second thing is we are often misinterpreted. So speaking publicly, writing publicly on different things, you become a target. Sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's not fair. And we are all people with difficult personalities and egos, and working together in a community that everybody knows one another, and even within the international scene, um, sometimes it's very hard to work together, even though it's absolutely necessary. That is sometimes a cost that we have. That there's this misinterpretation, and we're dealing in a very difficult context under extreme pressure. And I think also writing the book and specifically writing about martyrdom, there is a question about authenticity and and giving justice to the victim. Even though we are victims in certain cases, we are not living in Gaza. And we are speaking about people who have given their lives and calling for that kind of witness to the point of death. And
mhm.
I think this is something we struggle with is remaining authentic to the resistance movement, genuine, and giving justice to the oppressed. That is something that costs a lot. And then John and I are doing theology after work, so a lot of our time and effort is sacrificed. Sometimes social time, socializing with people and friends is a sacrifice to this. But saying that it's a complete honor to be doing what we're doing and to be representing whoever we are representing, the Palestinian communities and the movement and the global movement to try and decolonize. It's the absolute honor and joy to do that. So by no means I want pity for what we're trying to do. I am actually inviting everyone to join with us because the struggle is where you find life. The struggle is what keeps you going. That is an end in itself. It's living out a life of love, and meaning comes from it. So there's a cost, but the good thing to know is that Christ is with us in this struggle.
Man. On a slightly maybe lighter note, but maybe it's not, let's talk a little bit about what it looks like to work together with your brother, right? And we're guessing that there are some deeply emotional and high-stake materials that could either be an incredible anchor or an added stressor. When you guys find yourself disagreeing on a theological point or an editorial choice for your book or your work, how do you navigate that as brothers? Like, does it come instinctively, or tell us about that?
When Sam and I disagree, I go to my parents. No, I'm joking. I tell on him. No. Um, it actually connects to the previous conversation of the emotional weight. I don't know if I could do this type of work without the support and partnership and wisdom of Sam, because there's times where I can't be bothered to write or read, and Sam nudges me, and vice versa. So I hope, at least from my perspective, it's been extremely helpful and supportive, especially during these times, to do it as brothers. And it might sound weird, but Sam and I don't have that fundamental differences.
Mm.
There's some subtle differences or preferences, but we genuinely manage to work through them, and they tend to be not that big. And again, it's almost like a family project of a conversation that happens on the dinner table, and then eventually kind of putting it together in an academic form or slightly more systematic or articulated, uh, form. So it's actually been, I think one of the reasons we've managed to do what we've done, and it's not that much, but Sam and I, I think, empower each other. And having a thought partner for your good ideas is great, but also for your bad ideas, you need someone to be like, no, that's a you focus. So yeah.
Wonderful.
As you could see, the older brother went first. No, I think it's worth thinking for all of us because and I like to point this out that um, the theological inspiration that we had was together. It was as brothers reading together and talking together. That doesn't have to be with siblings, it can be with many things. But I think it's important that we did theology like this and we continue to do theology in such a way. John was reading randomly God of the Oppressed, while I was
Oh.
reading randomly a Black Theology of Liberation.
Hmm.
And you maybe randomly, maybe it's the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, but as brothers and as siblings, the theological imagination and vocabulary is inseparable for me without John. It has to be with someone from the family at least, or with a friend. And I think that's really important to cultivate in how we do theology. We should be doing theology together for one another, affirming one another, criticizing one another. I think that's a really nice way of the journey and of learning and moving forward. And we have yet to had a serious argument. So we might jinx it on this podcast, but
I know.
I'm confident that we won't.
What's next for both of you? I guess this is we're gonna wrap up here in a minute, but what's any projects on the horizon?
There is a there is a project that we've been meaning to do for some years. It might be a bit delayed because the circumstances here in Palestine have taken a lot of our time. We hadn't had a lot of time to be able to think and to write and
Mhm.
uh, yeah. We're not affiliated with academic institutions. We're independent scholars, so everything's on our time and resources.
Hmm.
The next project is a Palestinian Christology. What is it? What does it mean to say that Christ is Palestinian? Not only a Palestinian Jew 2000 years ago, but currently identifies with the struggle and with Palestinian people. What does that mean theologically and how we do theology? And also, what does it mean politically?
Yeah.
What does the event of the cross, the violence of the cross, mean beyond just the analysis of empire of oppressed and oppressor, but other intersectional elements within affirming that Christ is Palestinian? And where is that being articulated in academic spaces and non-academic spaces? And what does it mean for us in our current day? So very much inspired by other Christologies. James Cone is one of them. Christ is black. God
Hmm.
is black. Truth is black. But what does it mean for us in this context, and where can we expand on other works that have been done? So this is the next project. But as you can tell with my answer, the argument isn't yet crystallized and articulated in a final form.
I was gonna say in the sigh that you took as you were answering is Sam and I are really behind on that project because, like Sam said, we do this after work. We need to find, do this in our spare time, and also with everything that's happening, it's sometimes hard to motivate ourselves to sit down and read and write. And we just finished the previous book project, and it's a bit intense, if I'm being completely honest. And as Sam mentioned, we want to sort of tap into those public debates that happen, that people insist on the Jewishness of Jesus and others on the Palestinianness of Jesus, and none of them tend to usually be theologians, which is fine. And they also tend not to be Christians. So we also want to bring in the Christian theological perspective, and then also in conversation with other liberation theologians.
Well, when you finally get down to really working on that in earnest, I'm sure it's going to be an incredible work that you will produce, and in due course, I look forward to reading it.
Allah.
Inshallah.
Yeah,
Inshallah.
inshallah. Yes.
John and Sam, you've been incredibly generous with your time. This has been such a deep and thoughtful conversation, especially now that we're about on episode 5, 6, midway through our series, to ground us back in theology. Can you tell us where our listeners can find you or follow you, connect with you?
I've never been asked that question.
Oh,
Uh, you
They
can,
can buy the book, right?
yeah, you can buy the book. You can buy the
Yeah.
yeah.
book. You can come see us in Palestine. Come to Jerusalem. أهلا وسهلا. لا, بس on a serious note, if you want to follow some of our works and articles that we do, I guess become John's friend on Facebook because John usually
Facebook.
posts or write our names and then maybe some of the most recent publications we have. And yeah, and come to Palestine and meet us.
Okay.
Yeah.
And on
You
Facebook, would it just be John, Munayer?
Yeah, Munayer, John Munayer. I'm the one who posts about our work on social media. That's my role
Excellent.
within the sibling arrangement that happened sort of naturally. So feel free to follow us on that platform. But of course, you can also reach out to us on our emails as well. And again, if you're ever in Palestine, welcome. Happy to grab food, coffee, whatever, and get to know you.
That's awesome.
Excellent.
Yes, yes. Well, you know what? Both of you, thank you for joining us. It's great to see you. I wish we were in person, but really, really good to see you nonetheless on the screen. And peace and blessings to both of you and to your family.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. It's been a privilege speaking to you, and thank you for all of your solidarity work.
All right.
Friends, thank you so much for joining us on episode 6 of Two Priests in Palestine with John and Sam Munayer, theologians extraordinaire. This is part of a 3-episode drop on August 24th, 2026. You can find us on socials with Two Priests in Palestine's all spelled out, especially on Instagram and YouTube and all spaces where you can find podcasts. Thank you for being with us on this journey.